I don't know what happened to Marjorie. She's a nice woman, but I don't know what happened. She's lost her way, I think.
At the top of the show, we have Donald Trump responding to a reporter this week who asked a long and very involved question that basically was, what's up with Marjorie Taylor Greene? The answer is Trump doesn't really know, and he shifted the topic very quickly to talk about foreign policy. But this is the My Little Margie edition. I'm Claire Potter.
I'm Neil Young.
And today we're going to be talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene. But before we get there, let's start with the news roundup. And boy, has there been news this week. A federal judge's ruling that created a majority Democratic district in Utah highlights the successful fight against Trump's arm twisting to get the Congress he wants in 2026. I heard Dave Wasserman from the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. And Dave Wasserman says basically with California and the other states that have chimed in, it's zeroed out any advantage that the Republicans are going to get from this redistricting. What are you hearing, Neil?
Well, that's really interesting. I also think just like it's worth sort of taking a moment to talk about Utah, right? I think like a lot of folks might say, did I hear that correctly? A Democratic district in Utah? But this is a district that allows Salt Lake City to be, one district as opposed to how it's been treated in the past, divided between 4 districts. Salt Lake City is heavily Democratic leaning, very blue. And so I think this is like very interesting how it would allow for an accurate representation of a large district in Utah that also sort of upends, that place as a state that is seen as deeply red.
Yeah, and you could do something similar in Idaho too. I mean, you could just pluck out Boise and have
Absolutely.
that little square in the middle of all the pink. Have you ever been to Salt Lake City, Neil?
I have spent lots of my life in Salt Lake City. I grew up.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a dissertation that became my first book where Mormon history was a huge part of it. So I lived in Salt Lake City when I was writing my dissertation in graduate school for 2 months because I was at the LDS archives every day in Temple Square. But I also grew up skiing in Utah because I grew up in Florida and we didn't go on beach spring breaks. We went on skiing spring breaks. So yeah, my family vacation every year was to Salt Lake City to go skiing, which was probably partly why I became very interested in Mormon history as an adult.
Yeah, well, I partly grew up in southern Idaho, which is part of how I got interested in Mormon history. But I would have to say Salt Lake City is one of the most beautiful cities in the United States. Everywhere you stand, you can see the mountains, and now the Democrats are going to get to do their thing there, and I'm pretty pleased about it.
I would live there in a heartbeat. It's a beautiful and wonderful city.
I hear the men are really hot, too.
Oh, well, no comment.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so as the House returns after an almost 2-month vacation to vote on new Senate legislation to reopen the government, Democrats are debating whether the shutdown was worth it, whether 8 of their number crossing the aisle to end the suffering was a capitulation or if it was strategic, and whether Republicans can be trusted to open debate on restoring the ACA subsidies that make health insurance affordable for millions of Americans. Neil, what did you feel when you found out that the 8 were crossing the aisle?
I feel like I wasn't that surprised, to tell you the truth. It just felt like that this is what it was going to take for the shutdown to end, that it wasn't going to come about because Republicans conceded to the things that Democrats wanted and therefore all the Democrats got on board, but that there would be like a breakaway group that would be willing to cross the aisle to do this. I think, as you read from the experts who've commented on this particular shutdown and how it compares to others in recent history, many have pointed out that the folks that sort of generate the shutdown never get the things they want out of it. That this is consistent with that pattern. And so right. I'm not surprised by that. What I think is sort of interesting is this bigger question of like, who is the winner here? And is this part of a brilliant Democratic strategy, or is this, evidence, exhibit, 1 million of Democrats' fecklessness and like inability to make anything happen? I'm actually not entirely sure. And I can find sort of persuasive arguments in both of those sort of sides of the debates here, the debate here. But I'm curious what you think here about the bigger politics of it all, Claire.
Well, one of the things that hardly anybody's talking about is that it was only 8, and that brought it to 60, which gives you cloture under the old rules. And that strikes me as odd. I mean, 8 people, why not 9? Why not 10? There's certainly more than 8 people who didn't have to stand for election in 2026. None of these 8 do. 2 are retiring. 6, they don't have to stand for election. So I think Schumer gave them permission to do it. I've heard people say, well, Schumer couldn't hold them back anymore. But I think the question of what the exit ramp is from a shutdown is really important. And it's very rarely talked about. You're right. People rarely get what they want from the shutdown because it is the minority party that's doing it. So therefore, they have almost no leverage. It seems to me that the Democrats actually did accomplish a number of things that don't fit into the category of winning or losing. One is they put healthcare on the table. Healthcare is something that Americans have a tendency to forget about unless they're actually using their health insurance. But collectively, to have a conversation about it, that rarely happens. So really, the Democrats have put healthcare in the Republican basket. And one of the things we know is that red states are going to be hurt as worse or even more badly than blue states with this. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that it was time to get Adelita Grivalia back in the conversation. And she is, of course, the woman who was elected in Arizona, a Democrat, to replace her father, who had died. And she represents Arizona 7. Oddly, she was elected 7 weeks ago, and Mike Johnson said he could not possibly administer the oath of office until the House was back in session, which of course was a lie. He can do it whenever he wants. He could meet her, in Chicago in a bathroom and do it if he wanted to, but he didn't do it, which has meant that Arizona 7 has been entirely without representation for 7 weeks. And Johnson says that's not true. She can do things, but she didn't have a congressional email. She didn't have a congressional website. Nothing was plugged in her office. And so I actually think letting the Republicans hang Adelita Grijalva out there for 7 weeks showed the transactionalism of the Republican Party for a state like Arizona, which is perpetually purple.
Yes.
Right?
Yes to all that.
Yeah. So anything else you think they accomplished and anything that you think was a mistake?
Well, I think the healthcare point you make is important. That's one of the arguments I find really persuasive here. That it's both the healthcare and sort of pocketbook issues that the Democrats have been able to put to the center of American politics, and that's going to serve them well over the coming year. And I think it is true that those 2 items have been at the top of sort of political coverage. And I think I would say even just sort of Americans' minds in the last 2 months. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, and it's anecdotal, but I think it's an anecdote that's really evocative of what you're saying. I've had so many friends I've noticed on Facebook, and these are the sort of friends that I don't even know what their politics are, and they don't strike me as folks who follow the news closely. I've seen so many of them making Facebook status updates about their premiums going up. Right. And, I think they're doing it in part because that it's happening, but also because they are somehow absorbing that this is part of the public conversation right now. And so those public conversations, when they're both sort of explicit and implicitly felt by Americans, can shape, election consequences. And so I think, it's possible to look at these events and see this as part of a concerted Democratic strategy. I think the bigger question is, does something in the fall of 2025 have electoral consequences a whole year from now? I mean, we just don't know. Or is it like this is creating a moment in which, 9, 10, 11 months from now, Democrats running for office can point back to this and say, remember when the Republicans did that. We're here to fight for
Right.
you on healthcare and other pocketbook issues. We'll see. But I do think you're right that this put those issues out there in front and allowed Democrats to benefit from it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a couple of things that we haven't talked about. One is, of course, we're going into the holiday season.
Right.
And SNAP benefits were either dwindling or cut in half or not going to happen at all. And I think we were moving into a Grinch type situation with that, in which it's unclear whether the American people would blame the Democrats or the Republicans for not being able to feed their children over the holiday season.
Can I just say something
yeah.
more about that? Because I think it's really, we hadn't mentioned SNAP yet. And I think, what it also did was it sort of set up these softballs to Trump that, he hit out of the park in terms of like
Right.
the worst park ever, right? Like that
Right.
he just says the most horrible things on the
Right.
record, right? Like that he basically doesn't care that millions of people are about to
Right.
have food taken away from them. So, those are probably being edited into hundreds of commercials that are going to
Yep.
run nonstop. And I think that's important too. And then you also mentioned the holidays. And of course, we know that the huge news event of the last week or two was also the grounding of airplanes and the
Right.
huge hassles at airports. And that would have been all the worse through the intense holiday season. So I think there's a lot that's going on here and a lot of politics at work and a lot of really consequential things. And what the Democrats make of it, I mean, they can blow an advantage any given day, but it seems like they have a lot to work with here.
Well, and it wasn't clear that Sean Duffy actually had to cancel those flights. But what was clear is that when he began to do it, people like Abigail Disney were countering. And Abigail Disney is, of course, the heiress to the Disney fortune, and she spends all of her money trying to repair the damage that her family has done to the world. But she did an Instagram in which she revealed something I did not know, which is that 12% of the flights in the air at any given time are private planes.
Yeah.
And she said, well, if you want to ground some planes, why not ground all those captains of industry? Let's keep the private jets on the ground and let all the people fly for free. So it wasn't clear how that was going to shake out either. I would say, finally, the Epstein stuff was beginning to percolate back into the news. And this kind of insistence, and we're going to talk about that next, that Grijalva was not being sworn in because she would be the final vote on the petition to release the Epstein files. And let's just talk about that for a second. She has been sworn in by now. She was the final signature on a bipartisan petition demanding the full release of the Epstein files. And Speaker Mike Johnson has scheduled a vote on that petition for next Wednesday. In advance of that, as of Wednesday, we have the release of about 20,000 pages of emails between Jeffrey Epstein and a variety of other people, including Donald Trump. Or not actually Donald Trump, but he's talking about Donald Trump. Yeah. And it's actually an important point of fact that Donald Trump does not use email. He has never, to the best of my knowledge, written an email. But also Harvard President Larry Summers is, I hope, not leaving the House because of all the emails he sent. There are a couple things that strike me about this, Neil. One is that Democrats needed to clear the deck from the shutdown to let this Epstein thing have its full effect. So by sort of walking off the stage, they opened up the stage for another play entirely, one that everyone likes better. The other thing that really struck me about this is that these 20,000 pages of emails are in a Google Doc. I mean, you can go to Google, and there's a link from the government webpage to Google where you can go and just download all of them, which I just actually find astonishing. I can't even tell you why. But what do you think, Neil?
Yeah, it does feel a little like almost too transparent, too open, right? The very things we asked for, it feels a little unsettling. And I think in a way almost like untrustworthy. But I think,
Right.
obviously this is legitimate. I think, the 20,000 pages is part of this, like, just inundation to, like, sort of drown out the actual event by, like, providing too much evidence around it. I'm wondering if that's maybe part of the strategy here. A lot of interesting things in it, obviously. Like you said, there's no smoking gun email exchange between Trump and Epstein, but that's because Trump doesn't do that. But there's
Right.
a lot of emails about Trump. Epstein,
Right.
I think what this shows us is that Epstein was incredibly involved with and thinking about Trump for a very long time. And that's
Yeah.
representative of both, I think, the nature of their relationship and also Epstein's, dawning recognition that as president, Trump really mattered. And so he was trying to launch investigations of Trump's finances and all sorts of things to get dirt on him as well. So what a tangled web seems to be between these two men. As always, the larger question is, does any of this matter? And I'm not sure that this is any different than the things we've known before, but am I wrong there, Claire? Is this like a tipping point moment? Are we on the edge of a coming tipping point moment?
Well, let me say that Watergate felt a little bit like this. I mean, what people forget about Watergate is that it first happened, I think, in the summer of 1971, that the break-in at Watergate happened. And it was sort of briefly in the news and people talked about it, and then it was shut down. And then, of course, all the journalists went to work. But really, Nixon doesn't resign for another 2 years. It takes
Yeah.
2 years for Watergate to play out. Now, obviously, this Epstein stuff has been around for a while. I don't have any fantasies that it's going to take Donald Trump down, but as we're going to be talking about a little later in the show, it certainly is creating fissures in the MAGA movement that he is heavily implicated in this. And as you were saying, some of the Epstein emails absolutely suggest that there's other stuff to look at, that there are pictures,
Yeah.
that Trump has lied about the amount of time he spent with Epstein and
Yes.
at Epstein's properties. There's also some peculiar sub-themes, too, like Larry Summers' wife. And I guess there's a whole bunch of emails where Larry Summers is asking Epstein for dating advice, which is so vile and horrible. I mean, I can barely read those emails. But then he finally marries a woman who is in, I believe, the comparative literature department at Harvard, and she starts writing Jeffrey Epstein, giving him reading advice. Like, here are some things that you could read on the flight to Australia. And, she'll say, well, you've already read Lolita, but what about My Antonia? And she's recommending all of
Wow.
these books where grown men are having sex with young girls. And so I think there's going to be something else happening here around people who are very high up in cultural institutions being exposed for what they were willing to do for money. And then I also think that if MAGA cannot come up with a defense of Trump on this, things will start to crack apart a little bit. It may not take Trump down, but I think it will be very difficult for a great many of the senators and congressmen who have been all about the pedophilia to actually stay on point. What do you think?
I agree with that. I don't see this taking Trump down. If we imagine that, Trump being taken down as some sort of Watergate
Right.
scenario. But I think that there's other ways that Trumpism and Trump himself are damaged sort of decisively by this. That feels very possible. I mean, all the fragmenting we're seeing happening right now. I think the question is this fragmenting, are these the early cracks of like a huge crack up? Or are these early cracks that'll be, papered over, and the unity will be reestablished in the face of an election. I don't know, but I'm of the mind that you are, Claire, that this feels like a moment in which Republicans are going to splinter especially in terms of GOP leadership, in ways that are really significant for Trump. And so, this in some ways like tees up our bigger topic really perfectly, because I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is someone who really fits in quite interestingly here in terms of how she's navigated this issue and what it means for her relationship to Trump and the GOP writ large. But I think you're also seeing other signs of that from other Republican leaders. This can't feel great for John Thune, right?
Right.
This is not what he wants to be doing at all. And I think there's others like him who just are probably going to make some decisions here that signals a bit of distance between them and Trump. And also, like, Republican voters, I think, are really showing lots of division around this. And that's what ultimately matters most.
Yeah. Well, and there are two women I would like to get into the conversation here before we shift to Marjorie Taylor Greene. One is Lauren Boebert. And one of the things I learned about these petitions is that members can remove their names from the petition at any point until the 218th name is achieved. So apparently part of what was going on in the 7 weeks in which Grijalva was not being sworn in was the White House twisting arms among people who had signed the petition and trying to get them to take their names off. Several days ago, Lauren Boebert was brought to the White House for an arm-twisting session, and she said no. She said she wouldn't take her name off. And you know how I feel about Lauren Boebert.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think she is the most vile person. But I actually kind of thought that both she and Marjorie Taylor Greene are two women who really get it about sexual harassment and sexual assault, particularly Boebert, who was married at 16, who was a waitress for many, many years, held a number of working class jobs. There is something here that feminists used to imagine, which is that women just get it and they won't give up when something like this happens. So, I really, really admire Boebert for sticking with it in a peculiar way. One last Epstein-related thing, which is journalist Michael Wolff has slapped Melania Trump with a lawsuit, claiming that her threat to sue him for $1 billion is an attempt to stop his reporting on Melania's alleged involvement with Epstein. There is a little sub-theme here that says Melania was actually trafficked to Donald Trump and met him through Epstein. Do we think that's going to go anywhere? I mean, Michael Wolff is entertaining as hell, and he's got a great Instagram, and he's got a good podcast, a Substack now, and he's also got a GoFundMe because you can contribute to help him sue Melania Trump. He says that part of what he wants to do is get her on the stand and ask her questions about Epstein. This is just so crazy, Neil. What's going to happen?
Totally. I mean, him saying, like, I would love for them to take the stand and answer some questions for me. I mean, like, yes, bring it on. Also, like, I imagine this lawsuit's going to be thrown out. And the point that most of Trump's lawsuits, the reason why Trump does most of his lawsuits is as a threat of intimidation, right?
Right.
To silence folks. And he's been incredibly successful in doing that. But like Michael Wolff does not seem like the average person or even the average, businessman who might be easily intimidated or willing to go along with things just to like keep. I mean, so many of the threats and the lawsuits that Trump has done through the years are people he's in business with. So they had some sort of incentive to like just to put it away and to go along with the way the way Trump saw things. But Wolff has none of that driving him, and in fact quite the opposite. So this is seems like such a bad strategic move on the part of Melania Trump. Also, $1 billion, give me a break.
I know, it's ridiculous. Well, and apparently it is illegal to sue people just to intimidate them, which I had not known, since Trump does it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift to Marjorie Taylor Greene, otherwise known as MTG, which I think is a play on RBG from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who became a really sort of a character in popular culture at the same time as she became a congresswoman representing Georgia 14 in 2020. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Marjorie Taylor Greene? Who is she and how did she end up in Congress?
I mean, it feels like she's a woman who needs no introduction, right? Because has there been anyone who's been more in the news than Marjorie Taylor Greene for the last couple of years? She certainly made herself front and center in media coverage. And I think that's a big part of what drives her and also what shapes her politics. But, Greene is a Georgia businesswoman. Her family, her father has quite a successful construction business, right? And sort of suburban Atlanta. And she was supposed to run the family business and did for a while, but did so, I think, without much interest in it or ambition in leading it, and sort of has had a really interesting personal biography where she's just gone from one thing to another, including becoming a CrossFit fanatic for a while. And then ultimately running for Congress, and running for Congress as someone who was never engaged in politics. Like, her family is not, the sort of Georgia business family that donates heavily to the Republican Party. She had a long history of never even voting in elections, leading up to her own race. And yet seems to have been radicalized at a moment in which was really fortuitous for her, in terms of the shifting American political scene, also deeply connected to Trump, and the way in which he remade American politics was such that I think really served someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is prone to conspiracy, prone to outrage, prone to grievance politics. But she's someone who's really changed a lot, even in her short time in Congress. And I think it's one thing to sort of note her political evolution is one way to put it. But I think if you look at her longer biography and her inconsistency in her own life, I think it allows us to see or to talk about her politics as not necessarily a series of evolutions, and maybe more just as part of a consistent inconsistency in her own life.
Right. Well, another way of saying that would be she's extremely independent-minded, which is what she has been saying to people when they say, why can't you just support President Trump? And she says, well, I disagree with him about some things, and I'm very independent, and I'm not a follower. So that's one piece of it. I think one of the essays we read, at least I think we read it, I read it somewhere at some point, characterized her as a seeker, as someone who has been taken with serial enthusiasms. She was a Catholic, and she became an evangelical Protestant. She worships at, I believe it's called the North Point Community Church in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is a non-denominational evangelical church.
Mega church. I mean, one of the biggest in the country.
I so want to go. Have you ever been? I want to go.
I haven't.
Maybe we'll go together.
I mean, I've been to many of its similar versions. I mean, I've been to many a mega church.
Yeah,
and this is one of the biggest in the country. And but apparently, she's had a very inconsistent, relationship with that church as well. Was a sort of huge devotee of it. And then I think folks there have said, oh, we haven't seen her in years. But you were saying that this is sort of part of her seeking, right? Right,
exactly. And also, apparently, she left the Catholic Church because of the scandals over pedophilia and the church covering up those scandals and so on. And she was just disgusted by that. So I think there's another theme in Marjorie Taylor Greene's both personal and political life, which is that she really detests corruption. And that there may be something here where some of the aspects of Trump's inconsistencies are really getting to her. But let's roll back to her first term, which was really quite tempestuous. She didn't like to play with others. Her best friend was Lauren Boebert, and together they were sort of seen as this sort of cheesy couple, this sort of Bobbsey twins in from the country kind of thing, which is probably unfair and sexist and horrible. But it was easy to do that because she was spreading conspiracy theories, some of them which were blatantly anti-Semitic. She was threatening Democratic colleagues. She was a conduit for Russian propaganda. In 2021, she was suspended from Twitter for spreading COVID misinformation, and she was fined $50,000 for not wearing a mask on the House floor. Now, this is where I started to notice Marjorie Taylor Greene, which is she finally agreed to wear a mask after paying $50,000 in fines. But then she had these masks made that had things on them like free speech and MAGA and Trump and so on. So she would appear with this mask, but the mask had a blatantly partisan message. She's also a self-identified Christian nationalist. So that first 2 years, she really doesn't get to do anything because she got suspended from all of her committees, right? Mm-hmm. So what did this do for her?
Well, it certainly didn't put her in favor of, in good stead with Republican leadership. But if anything, it made her a huge national name, and it attracted a ton of attention and a ton of support and a ton of financial support. Right. I mean, she has become an incredible fundraiser and often uses these moments as fundraising opportunities. And folks have written about how, as a young congressperson, she was really not well versed in so much of what it means to be in the House of Representatives. But one of the things that folks point out she got really good at really fast was in fundraising, and again, in particularly sort of leveraging these moments to her financial advantage. And I think there's some people who think that all these twists and turns she's made are calculated for the very purpose of fundraising. But I think, whether or not it's driven by that or that she uses it to benefit from, it's clear that she can raise a lot of money. And she has a real enthusiastic base behind her.
Yeah, I mean, I think in one of the pieces we read, there was a number like 3.2 million that she raised in a couple of days after that classic time that she and Lauren Boebert were heckling Joe Biden at the State of the Union address in 2022. So in many ways, she represents the worst of MAGA. What has also been kind of interesting to follow about her, though, is that she makes a lot of friends. I mean, Boebert was her friend until she wasn't, and then they really started yelling at each other in public and so on. But Matt Gaetz was a friend of hers. She and Gaetz were very, very close. And then George, what's his name, from Long Island?
Santos.
George Santos became her really good friend. And George Santos, we believe, was pardoned because Marjorie Taylor Greene asked Trump for the pardon. So there's a piece of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't want to misuse this concept, but she's kind of queer on a certain level. I mean, she's always sort of out there on the edge. She doesn't seem to want to come into the institution, but rather she makes her alliances on the fringe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you rightly noted the independent streak in her, or really the independent predisposition of like her personality and her character. And I think, in one way, that independent politics, that independent sort of stance looks different when, say, Biden is president and you're running as a opposition to Democratic control of the White House. It looks a lot different when your own party controls everything. And and the way you signal and the way you even operate as a independent actor becomes one where the people she's really taking on the most are fellow Republicans and even Trump. And so, I mean, she loves to call as she says, the Democrat Party, the party of communists. So it's not like she's giving that up, and it's not like she's looking to make bipartisan alliances in order to move, legislation she cares about forward. But it's just that I think in her own psychology and also in the particular political movement that she drives and she benefits from, it's about taking it to the man, whoever the man is. Right. And there's a huge American appetite for that.
Well, and just listening to you, one of the things that makes me think about is whether Marjorie Taylor Greene is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the limits of MAGA politics. I mean, I know what the Republicans imagined, and certainly the redistricting pointed to this, was a permanent majority.
Right.
That Republicans would be in control in the United States until the end of time, and that they could use their leverage now to make that happen, to consistently shut off opportunities to grow a Democratic base. But when, in fact, that is your goal, you become the institution. And so for an anti-institutional party that has recruited people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rand Paul, I mean, he's another one in the Senate who is constantly sort of pushing back. When you're the institution, you will then develop opponents within your own ranks. And Greene is certainly one of them.
And it's interesting how often her response to things, particularly when it has to do with disagreements with GOP leadership, is, well, I'm just here to serve my constituents.
Right.
And on one hand, that's what we would hope any congressperson would say, right? Like, this is what my constituents are telling me they want. I think it's really interesting, though, when that is the argument that you make against your own party and the things that the party is doing. And when some of the points that she's defending or the points of departure are things like, the Affordable Care Act and, critiquing the party as not caring about the lives and the incomes of working people. Right. And so it suggests that Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't driven by ideology, or even that she doesn't have a coherent political ideology. Right. But I'm not sure what it suggests in its place. Is that what I don't believe that she truly only cares about delivering to her constituents whatever it is they want. But I do think that is a useful argument for her to make to, again, signal her independence, to signal her anti-institutional bona fides, and also to sort of position herself as someone who is getting things done on behalf of the voters who took her to Washington, as opposed to, Mike Johnson, who's willing to send everyone away on a 2-month vacation.
Right. Well, and Greene, now I'm trying to think of her district, which I think is a suburban district northwest of Atlanta, right?
Yes.
It's a whole series of very white suburbs northwest of Atlanta, right?
Yes, but one that gets very rural very fast. So it has those sort of northwest suburbs of Atlanta, sort of on its border. But then a good chunk of it is a very rural corner of northwest Georgia that she never lived in. I mean, she lived within a different district that neighbored it that was fully suburban. Right. And one that she knew that she wouldn't be able to win, even if it was a Republican-leaning suburban district. It was one that she wasn't going to look good in, that she wasn't going to be the sort of Better Business Bureau, country club Republican type. Right. So she moved to this other one where the sort of conspiratorial MAGA politics at least made sense at the time she was running for office.
Well, and what she is saying about herself is, I haven't changed, MAGA changed.
Right, yes.
And one of the things she was criticizing Trump for in that little clip that he was talking back to the reporter in was, what is he doing going abroad all the time? Yep. When we have a shutdown, when we've got economic problems at home, when prices are rising, why is he always on a plane going somewhere else? And of course, there's an easy answer to that question, which is, in their second term, presidents have a tendency to do foreign policy. That's how they want to be remembered. That's where they will make their big mark, although that's probably not going to be true of Trump. Mm-hmm. But she said, I'm America first. Yep. And he said he was America first, but he doesn't look like he's doing America first. So come back home. And I would also say her district is an interesting mix of suburbanites who are feeling the pain as much as any Long Island suburb or Massachusetts suburb, and rural people who are suffering from the downstream effects of the tariffs, right?
That's right, yeah. And also to other Trump-led economic policies. I mean, again, attacks on the healthcare system, rising cost, all the rest. Yeah, and I
Right.
think, the America First thing is really interesting because for a long time it operated as sort of an unquestioned unifying theme of the right. And
Yep.
this is a place in which Greene and others, I think, are starting to say, no, not that America First, this America
Right.
First, right? Like
Right.
not that version of
Right.
it.
Right.
And like that we are the true holders
Right.
of a politics that is consistent with the America First that voters backed. And
Yep.
this is also happening again with the debate that's sort of emerged in the last day or two around the H-1B visas, right? And like
Right.
Trump sort of coming out for them. And the America First or the particular online version of the America First crowd is going nuts over
Yep.
Trump and the H-1B
Yep.
issue. And I think this is a thing that also like Greene has her finger on.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree on that. And I think we could have predicted that Trump was going to back away
Of course.
from the H-1B visa thing because it is the tech industry that uses them most consistently.
Yes.
And I think there's a real question around H-1Bs, around bringing people in who can be paid a great deal less because the only reason they're allowed to stay here is because they have that visa, versus what would it mean to actually get the talent you need up to speed in any reasonable time frame to support these tech companies. I mean, I do think, education is a huge problem in this country, and nobody wants to untangle the pieces of it that would actually provide the workforce that we need to not bring in workers from abroad. Not that I'm against bringing in workers from abroad, not at all, and we've done it for decades. But Greene is also really leaning hard on some economic issues that Trump either understands very poorly or is not interested in. She spoke out very early against the expiration of the ACA tax credits. I think she even said after the big, beautiful bill was passed, well, I didn't know that was in it,
Yes, she did.
which was kind of a not very smart thing to say because that is the job
Your
of her
job.
staff to tell her what is in it. On the other hand, she may really not have known. She has also said, and this was really interesting to me, she put this post up on X on Tuesday, and I'm just going to read it to you. Restoring America's ability to raise a family on one income, to me, should be a top priority. It was once the norm in America. And what's interesting to me about this was a position promoted by Elizabeth Warren and her daughter, Amelia Tiagi, in 2004 in a book they wrote together called The Two Income Trap. And one of the things Warren talked about when she was running for president was that when both parents are working and something bad happens, you have no one else to throw into the workforce. And so our economy and our society should be based on one income per family, even though it's perfectly fine to have both parents working. But that an economy that requires both parents to work is a fragile economy, and it's fragile for families. And Greene seems to be in that spot. And I'm wondering, did she read the book or did she just figure this out herself? I don't know. What do you think?
Or like, what's the motivation behind this? Is this
Right.
like a class critique or is it like a social order critique? And I think it's
Right.
probably, it's probably a combination for Greene.
Right.
But I think like, it's hard not to see that argument from Marjorie Taylor Greene and not think that it's also inflected by and shaped by a certain cultural conservatism
Right.
about women in the home, male headship, and all the rest in a way that I
Right.
don't think is what was
Right.
animating Elizabeth Warren when she
Right.
was writing that book two decades ago.
But that's really interesting, Neil, because you're pointing out how some of these economic issues that different people with different ideologies might come together on them for different reasons.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we can imagine that happening certainly in a different media age. I mean, I think the
Yep.
challenges for that are just challenges for sort of like
Right.
bipartisan, not consensus, but like bipartisan alignment and activism are all the more difficult, in our
Yep.
moment and all the ways we know that social media and cable news have siloed us all. But yes, I think that there's like a way in which the sort of economic critique that may be driven by really different cultural values could work towards a reform or towards a different policy agenda than we have currently, if like things are only sort of seen through the framework of like Republicans versus Democrats. And I think the other thing I would add to that, which is not necessarily a related issue, but sort of a related politics, is Israel. I mean,
right.
Taylor Greene is incredible. You mentioned earlier that she has a long history of anti-Semitic comments. She's also emerged as one of the loudest critics of Israel. And being anti-Israel and anti-Semitic are not synonymous, although there's like often a lot of overlap there. But to see her emerge as such an outspoken voice on the right against Israel and against U.S. involvement, really, I think is the way to put it, against U.S. involvement in Israel, again, that she ties back to her America First politics.
Right.
Like, why are we giving all this money to Ukraine? Why are we giving all this money to Israel? I'm the only one who's willing to say it about Israel in this party, is really interesting. And also, links her to folks on the left in some ways, although I think there would be like huge, amounts of disagreement when you really got to look at like what the politics there were. But I think there's just a way to say that like Greene's independent streak or her sort of unusual politics maybe don't look as independent or don't look as unusual if you think about them outside of the framework of just like the Republican Party.
Right. And Trumpism. And Trump has drifted because Trump has no real moral center and he has no coherent ideological approach to anything. So he sort of hops from thing to thing and does what is convenient or what will benefit him or what's easy or what gets him, allows him to get a win. And actually, Greene is sort of emerging as this counterpoint to say, no, actually, MAGA and America First meant something. This is what it meant, and this is what my criticism is based on. I want to go back to Epstein and it just also point out that Marjorie Taylor Greene has been a consistent critic of the failure to release the Epstein files, along with Thomas Massie, who I actually like a great deal. He seems like a good guy. And she spoke on September 3rd at a press conference on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by the alleged victims of financier and alleged sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, to demand the release of the materials. And then she said, which I thought was kind of fascinating, she said that when they were released, she would, quote, read every damn name into the congressional record.
I mean, put that on TikTok immediately, right? Like, don't we want to watch that?
Oh my God. Yes, we do. We do. She seems very, very sincere about this issue. How do we understand that? Because a lot of Republican women kind of avoid it, and they don't really want to talk about the various ways that women are endangered in the workplace. They don't want to talk about gender inequality. They don't want to talk about anything that might open them up to being labeled a feminist. And we know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a feminist, although there is something called conservative feminism that we might shoehorn her into. How should we be thinking about it, Neil? And also, just to add a little bit, because you grew up in the South, you know a lot about Southern women. How does she read as a Southern woman on this thing?
Well, I think, to the first part of the question, it's hard not to see this like vigilant commitment that she has to this issue and not imagine that there must be some personal connection to the issue. Right. And she has never suggested that's the case that I'm aware of. Right. But I also think just thinking about her own adult life as someone who worked in the construction industry, who then got very involved in CrossFit. I mean, these are highly, highly male spaces. And I imagine that there were there was lots of exposure to things that probably really made an impression on her, and perhaps like, even some bad scenarios. So I wonder if that's partly shaping this. She just also seems like such a bulldog, and like this is like the bone that she's not going to let go of. And I think she's also not, as I said earlier, she's not an Elizabeth Dole. She is not a suit wearing country club corporate Republican woman.
Right.
She's scrappy. She's, not always that put together in terms of her presentation and the way she speaks. And I think that's really authentic to who she is, but that also seems sort of important here. Like, she's not a go along to get along type. No. And I think she's not the sort of Republican corporate woman who's had to like turn a blind eye to a lot of things in order to sort of advance their career. So I think that's probably all part of it. And she's certainly not in the mold of the Republican Southern woman that I think we've been most familiar with in the last couple of decades, who's, the luncheon holding, supportive wife, who maybe then pursues a political career. She's really navigated her own course, it seems like. And I think that's one that is relevant for this attachment she has to the Epstein issue.
Yeah, I agree with what you've said there. And, just to bring Lauren Boebert into the conversation a little bit, I mean, I've written about Boebert and Greene a fair amount on the Substack, and listeners, you can just throw it into the search engine and find those articles. Some of them are in the top 10. People really, really like them. But there's also a piece in me, I think I said earlier, that Lauren Boebert, was married at 16 and worked as a waitress. There's not a waitress in the world that hasn't had to put up with fanny slaps and grabs and so on for tips. And so I think there is some feature here. I also have to wonder, given what we have seen of the MAGA Republican Party, both in those texts from young Republicans, from the behavior of Donald Trump, from the behavior of Corey Lewandowski, my guess is there's a fair amount of sexual harassment on Capitol Hill in the Republican Party as well. And it's nothing I know about. It's nothing I've seen, but it would be odd if any workplace had no sexual harassment. And this Republican Party seems particularly able to empower men to do terrible things.
Yes.
So Fast Company, the tech and design platform, is calling Marjorie Taylor Greene's evolution the brand pivot of the year. She's been making a tour of liberal outlets. She was on The View. She was on CNN. She has been sort of moving past the normal conservative outlets to get herself out there to a broader audience. Do we think she really wants to run for president in 2028?
It seems like it. This feels like the type of thing you would do if that's what the goal was, particularly given how she has interacted with the media in the past. I mean, we read a really great profile of her in The Atlantic from 2021. So, her first year in Congress. And the reporter spent a ton of time, interviewing everyone around her, and finally got to ask her a question at an event. And Marjorie Taylor Greene says, "Are you that reporter who's, talking to all my friends? I'm not going to speak to you. You're just a Democrat activist." And there's like 100 examples of those where, she was stopped by reporters on Capitol Hill and says, "I will not answer your question. You're a Democrat activist." Like, there's one very famous one when it's actually a British reporter is trying to interview her, and she won't answer their question. And so that was a pretty consistent attitude and strategy she had with media for the first couple of years of being on Capitol Hill. That is not what she's showing now as she's going to The View, as she's going to places that she might have characterized as, hotbeds of Democratic activism in the past. So I think for her to make this departure from previous ways of interacting with media is to signal that she's now working on behalf of something else, which seems like a national run. Let's remember also that she wanted to be governor of Georgia, or wanted to run for the governorship, and that the Trump White House said they wouldn't get behind her. And so I think that's both shaping, her response to Trump in general, but also maybe shaping how she's sort of thinking about a national strategy here, especially how it relates to traditional media.
Yeah, well, and as you can see in any photograph of Trump and the people around him, it's such a male institution, the MAGA Republican Party. And, she's ambitious and smart, and she must be feeling that too. I know a gay guy who is a political consultant, a GOP political consultant, who at one point I was fulminating about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and he said, no, she's really smart and funny and nice. And it kind of took me aback and made me think, okay, let's see what you got and let's see what we're looking at. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, that the first woman president of the United States will be a Republican.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's in the cards now, but I'll be cautious about making that prediction for another 3 years or so. Let me also just toss this in, because I didn't put it in the news summary, but the Supreme Court turned down the gay marriage case this week. Kim Davis has to go back to Kentucky, and pay that couple that she turned away $335,000. That kind of thing also makes me think that MAGA is going to have to moderate itself, and it knows it's going to moderate itself. Obviously, this is the court. It's not the Trump administration, but the court seems very alert to what the Trump administration wants in all of these things. And this would have been an important case for Christians. Really important case. So it seems to me that happening around the same time as Marjorie Taylor Greene redoing her image, that there are conversations in the Republican Party that we are not attuned to yet.
Well, listen, none of the election news from last week was good for the GOP. And if anyone there is paying attention and really recognizing reality, they're mindful of the huge uphill climb I think they have for the next year going into 2026. So there are going to be lots of folks who double down on the thing they've been doing because they think it's some sort of ideological purity test, or they think it's like some commitment to core values. But I think there's going to be a lot of Republican operatives and leaders who say, nope. We can mix things up a little bit so that we are not experiencing a shellacking next November.
Hard agree. So, Neil, let's turn to what we want to go viral this week. You have a particularly, it's just bizarre and scary contribution. So why don't you hit us with it?
Yes. This is a piece that came out from the BBC yesterday. The headline is, Italy investigates claims of tourists paying to shoot civilians in Bosnia in the 1990s. This is a horrific story. Although one, I should say, hasn't been fully evidenced, but there is an investigation underway based on, some pretty credible evidence that rich Italians paid to travel to Bosnia-Herzegovina in the early 1990s to participate in what were called sniper safaris, where they would pay these enormous sums to sit outside of, these perches above Sarajevo and shoot at civilians during the conflict that was going on there. This is all coming out because of a journalist named Ezio Gavazzani, please forgive my terrible Italian pronunciation there, who has filed a complaint and apparently has been investigating this for a long time. He was aware of it during the 90s when this supposedly was going on and had done some investigating, but apparently wasn't able to fully sort of report this out, but was inspired to revisit this again because of a documentary he'd been watching, and has started to dig further once again. And in February, he handed his findings over to prosecutors. And I think, there's a lot to be said here. For one, again, like, there needs to be a lot more, investigation here and real documentation of whether or not this is something that really happened. There's evidence that really suggests it is, but there's a lot, I think, of missing evidence to really confirm that this is what was taking place. And a lot of folks who have said, who have sort of credible evidence to suggest that it's more of an urban myth, and a story that sort of caught hold. But I think, for one, it speaks to the importance of independent journalism and the work that investigative journalists do, that often is decades long, to go after the most difficult and the most challenging stories, and stories that people in power spend great effort in making sure never see the light of day, which apparently has been part of this story as well. The Bosnian leaders have done their best to make sure none of this is ever investigated. So I think that's a huge part of this story. And it also just feels so, in our very dystopian moment, it just feels like a particularly gruesome story to read, even as it doesn't come out of it's not a contemporary story, but one from several decades ago. But what a headline to see in my feed yesterday. And I definitely hope that he'll continue to invest, and others will continue to investigate this, and we'll know whether or not this is something that really happened.
I mean, arguably, they must have been very powerful people who did this. I mean, this strikes me as something you would pay a lot of money to do, and was sort of marketed as this dark, rare experience, right?
I mean, doesn't it feel like it has such resonance with the conversation we were having today about the Epstein files and the sort of folks who are caught up in that? I think that's a really smart point. If they're wealthy, they're probably also very powerful, and who knows what sorts of names might have been involved in this if this was indeed a thing. Yeah,
I mean, if we needed more arguments for socialism, we've got one. I mean, wealth is just like so corrupting. The idea that people can just indulge every desire that they have, no matter how horrifying, and that it can happen because you have money, and everybody wants money. And it's horrifying. Okay, we're going to post a link to that, listeners, if you can bear to read it. I'm going to end on a happier note. My pick this week is already viral, but I missed it. I don't know why. Another one of those shows that I watched the first episode, decided I didn't like it, and that only came back to it 4 years later when I was in bed with a cold last week. I am currently in love with the television show Hacks, which first dropped it was HBO then, it's now Max in 2021. There are 4 seasons. There's a 5th season coming up, and I think it's going to end after that. It's a series that stars Hannah Einbinder as Ava Daniels, a struggling young comedy writer, and Jean Smart as a veteran stand-up comedian at the end of her career. The series is so beautifully plotted and written, and it has so much to say, not just about women and creativity, but about all of us committing to learn from generational differences. And, part of what's wonderful about Einbinder and Smart as a pair is Einbinder is this sort of woke young thing who has a lot of opinions and almost no life experience, and Smart as the comedian knows everything, except she doesn't know what young people think. So together they make one whole person on a certain level.
Yep.
And I've watched about 2.5 seasons of it. And one of the things I've noticed is that Ava, the writer, has this very problematic mother who she doesn't really connect to. Deborah, the comedian, played by Jean Smart, has a daughter who's a mess. So she's not really very maternal, and Ava's not really daughterly, but again, together, they make a whole mother-daughter pair, and they change each other, and they change each other in really important ways. It also is a kind of women's version of Entourage, which is, everybody has enough money. Deborah Vance, the comedian, has like 6 houses all over the United States. Meals are produced on demand. There are private planes and so on. So you can, as opposed to your viral piece, Neil, wealth here becomes something that's just fun and comfortable. Yeah. But Vance is also not disconnected from the people who made her wealthy. And it's a really good portrait of a certain kind of woman in entertainment who has had to fight and scrap for absolutely everything that she has gotten, but never forgets that it's her fans that have put her there. And it's obviously something you see in country music a lot. Mm-hmm. Like I remember going to a Reba McEntire concert in Windsor, Connecticut or something like that. And people would run up to the stage and hand Reba McEntire bouquets of flowers. And she would take them as she was singing and thank them and put the bouquet aside and so on. And there were all these deeply human interactions. Well, you see Deborah Vance doing that as well with her fans. And so it's a wonderful portrait of entertainment as it was and entertainment as it is, and maybe entertainment as it could be again if young people and older people could teach each other what they know.
Yeah, I love the show too. I do think there was an inconsistent season, which I'm trying to remember if I think it was maybe season 3 that sort of felt like it wasn't as strong as the others. But I love, the heart of it, of course, is that relationship that, the generational divide and how the two of them connect across it and don't connect across it in many ways, and how that shapes the relationship, and also how they connect across that generational divide and don't connect across that generational divide. Right. To form the comedy that Jean Smart's character is doing, and sort of this constant question of like who's her audience, what's the message, what are the jokes, how does she need to retool herself for a new moment, does she need to stay true to the thing, and the supporters who were there who made her famous in the first place. The two leads are just absolutely perfect in their roles.
Stellar. And Jean Smart was in Designing Women, which, as I remember, is one of your favorite shows. Oh, yeah. All right, Neil. Well, I think we've gotten to the end of the show. Thanks a lot. It's been real, and I'll see you next week.
All right. See you later.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Share this podcast with a friend who loves history, politics, and smart conversation. You can follow Neil and me on Threads, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, and Instagram. Go to the Political Junkie Substack at clairepotter.substack.com for show notes, more episodes, to leave a comment or question, to subscribe for free, or to support our work for as little as $5 a month. You can also subscribe for free by searching for us on your favorite platform. If you do, please leave a rating and a comment so that other listeners can find us. Our podcast is supported by the New School for Social Research and by paying subscribers. Political Junkie is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Claire Potter. Today's theme is Easy Going by Heartland Nights. You can find their work and all the talented artists we feature on these episodes on Soundstripe. That's all for now. See you next week.